Okay, so here I am. And we're going to talk about the power-ups today. So here's invincibility, one of our good power-ups, and it's kind of hard to see, but I get this little sparkle around me. I'm not going to take damage while I have this invincibility, so I can just ram into stuff and get some experience points. Speed boost is a really nice one because I can move very quickly. Big shot is kind of fun because my bullets look really large. Shove is kind of nice. It's actually really good if somebody's trying to ram into you because you can shove them away. And I think in the future I might make this a lot more powerful. Let me try and shove this yellow. Whoop. The hitboxes on the power-ups are a little weird. So there we go, and bang, now he shoves away real hard. So going back to the code, how do we actually do these? These are quite easy, but I want to first bring your attention to main, where I just have this testing all power-up. I have a comment here, testing all power-ups, right? And I just loop through all my power-up options, which is a list, and I create a power-up. I set the actual ability, the power attribute, to one of the power-up options. That's my list. One of the values in that list. I set the text for the power-up, and then I put it into my all sprites so that it can be drawn on the screen and be collided with by the other players. So this is how to create a particular power-up. You can also just create a random power-up. So this right here will create a random power-up. So if you uncomment it, right, it'll create it at the location 500, 500, those XY coordinates. It'll set the text to white. If you teleport a power-up, it'll basically re-randomize its XY coordinates. So that's what I'm doing here, is I'm just saying make a random power-up. And by the way, when you create a power-up just initially, it is automatically random by default. This is the code that you would need to make it not random. In fact, these two lines in particular, where I set the power to a particular string, this is actually a list of strings. I'll show you power-up options in a second. And then I set the text to be that string, p.power, which is a string. Right, so here's one random power-up. Here is basically a list of all my power-ups just for testing so that they're on the screen right away. Before we get into more details of the power-ups themselves, the power-up options, that list, if we go to constants.py, we have the power-up options right here. So we got invincibility, teleporter. Teleporter just teleports you to a random location in the world. Spread shot. So basically this will make each shot into 3 that's spread out. Big shot is what you saw, the big bullet. Speed boost makes you move fast. Shove makes you shove other stuff away. That's all we have right now. There's so many weird and interesting options you can have for this. If you're wondering about these other little variables here, frames, I believe, is how long each power-up lasts. I think this actually might not be used. This might be, we'll see when we go over to powerup.py. Powerup shift is just shifting the center of the hitbox because collisions, they're still weird. And it's a little bit awkward because a shorter named power-up compared to a longer named power-up, the hitbox won't be, one of these two has a really off-center hitbox because, well, the size of the text is variable depending on the length of the text, and the size of the hitbox is not. So that's just a little bit weird. But anyway, that's how it is for now. So let's go over to powerup.py and see how this works. So we import a bunch of stuff, and that's all pretty standard things there. We do use Pygame, and we initialize Pygame, and we need to do this because we're going to use a font object. We're going to draw text on the screen. So here we create a font so that we can display the power-up as text. Power-up is its own class. It inherits from the Diep sprite, as almost everything does. So when it initializes its parent class, when it says to its parent class, here's what I know about my variables, it's going to say that its type is type power-up. And you can go back to constants and see all the different types in there. It's not going to draw its health bar. It doesn't have a health bar. Here, self.randomize power is where we randomize whatever the ability of the power-up is. So I just have a function like that I can call at some point. So for example, you could make a mystery power-up fairly easily that once it gets activated, it randomizes itself and then gives that power. That would be a cool thing to do. Every DF sprite, and this is also a DF sprite because it inherits from DF sprite, has this list of attributes called self.x's. And one of those attributes is collision damage. And we don't want our creatures to get damaged when they're just trying to collect power-ups, so we just set the damage to 0. That's what that line is. Draws itself on the screen. I don't think I need to go into too much detail about that. Apply power. So this function is what gets called when somebody collides with the power-up. And that other somebody is just named other. It's the argument to this function. And this is just a big, long if-elif statement. And it checks to see what is the power of this current power-up. Is it invincibility? Is it teleporter? Is it spread shot? Whatever. And then it applies that power to other. And I'm hoping that, you know, one of the things you're seeing here is, wow, this is really short code. It's 2 lines of code to become invincible for a few seconds. It's 1 line of code to teleport somewhere. It's 2 lines of code to get spread shot temporarily. So here's how this works. It's all in the power of this X's list. This is a list of attributes that each Diep sprite has. So if I want the other sprite to not take any damage, I access its armor index, and armor index and all these other constants that are all caps are just in the constants.py file. And I set it to 0. So reminder, I mentioned this in the last video, but it's worth saying again. The armor is actually just like % damage taken, % damage received. So if it's 0, then no matter how much you damage me, I receive 0 of that damage. If it was like 50% and you hit me with 10 damage, I would take 5 of that damage. The other important thing, so there's this first line where we actually say, here, apply the power. And then there's this next line where we access other.expiration. And since we're appending, hopefully you guessed that expiration is a list. It's a list so that you can have more than 1 power-up at the same time, although I will say that at the current time, that's a little bit broken. You can acquire multiple power-ups at the same time, and you will have those abilities. But as soon as 1 power-up expires, it will actually expire all of your power-ups. Without changing a lot of this code, I'm not sure how to make it so that just 1 power-up would expire. But we can also have the different critter variants that I showed last time, like we have the sniper variant and the machine gunner variant and the rammer variant. I'm not sure how to make those work together because those variants, when they reset just arbitrary different attributes of the critter, right? The machine gunner resets different attributes than the rammer does. So I wasn't sure how to basically say, oh, bullet count index needs a special reset depending on the variant, but armor index doesn't necessarily. Like depending if it's an other, like the rammer has a special armor, but it doesn't have a special bullet count. But you can imagine like, I mean, this is not actually how the machine gunner works, but imagine the machine gunner had a special bullet count, but it didn't have a special armor. The resets would need to be different depending on every single variant. And yes, I could write that code by hand, but it would require basically an if statement for every single variant, for every single attribute. And I was not willing to do that. So currently, you can acquire more than 1 power-up, but as soon as 1 of them expires, all of them expire. Okay, going back in here. So expiration is a list. We append a list to that list. We append the power-up time, and currently all the power-up times are the same. So I was saying in constants.py, which I'm going to go back to right now, I was saying I wasn't sure if this is actually used. It is, right? 360 frames is 5 seconds? 6 seconds? 6 seconds is 6 seconds. So every single power-up currently lasts 6 seconds. You could make a power-up that lasts like 5 minutes, a super powerful, or even just like a weak power-up, but it has some effect for like a long time. You would just change this to a big number, you know, and then the critter would have that power-up, unless they got a different power-up and then it reset. They'd have this power-up for a really long time. And then you say which attribute you want to reset. So this used to work where one power-up could expire, and then you could still have other power-ups in effect because I'm passing in exactly which attribute needs to reset to baseline. The problem is that if we want variation on the critters, we want the rammer or the sniper or whatever, that makes this a lot harder because now the baseline is different depending on what critter variant you are. You should notice that most of them are very similar, right? It's this one line of code modifying an attribute and this other line of code saying, hey, it should expire eventually. Teleport's the exception. It just immediately teleports you. It's not a lasting effect. Spreadshot is kind of neat. It just triples the count of your bullets. That's all it does. So times equals 3. Times equals is like plus equals, but with multiplication. And then it tells it to expire. Bullet size, it just quintuples the size of your bullet. And then it says, hey, you should expire at some point. Speed boost triples your acceleration, says it should expire. Shove multiplies your shove by 10. And honestly, that's not even enough. We should really make the shove even bigger, 100 right here. Now, this, of course, won't be updated in your code that's online. But let's see how a shove of 100. That's going to look a little bit better here. Great, here we go. Shove times 10. Get out of here. Be gone. All right, get that stuff out of here. That's a much better shove. That's what we want to have. What I want you to take away from this is that it's really easy to add and change power-ups. What you would need to do is you would need to go into constants. You would need to add a power-up option in here. And the reason you need to do that is not just for my testing code, but because in Powerup, if I like randomize my power, what I'm actually doing is I'm just using random.choice to grab an item out of that list. And then I'm changing my text to display on the screen. So if you just add a Powerup, you add the kerfluffle Powerup, right, whatever that does. The only other thing you have to do is then go into Powerup itself and say elif self.power equals kerfluffle. And then you need to change one of the creature's attributes. What attributes are available for you to change? Well, you just go into constants and you have your whole attribute list right here. So you can change things like the acceleration, total hit points, collision damage, how fast they refire, bullet size, recoil, you know, all this good stuff here. Friction can be really fun to mess around with. Mostly it's really fun to set it to 0. All those things. And we could even add other attributes if you want to do that. The other thing that I have not done at all that you could do is you could have a Powerup change multiple attributes at once. There's really easy changes to Powerups. That's why it's worth fewer number of points in the points spreadsheet. But there's lots of fun stuff you can do with that. And if you do want to do something more complicated, like you want to add a Powerup that it's not as easy to just basically plug it in with the code I've written. You need to add like attributes or something to self.x's, which by the way, if you're looking for self.x's, it's in Diep sprite. So here's Diep sprite right here. And if I scroll down, here's self.x's. And I know this is a weird line of code. It's such a lazy line of code. I shouldn't do this, but you'll occasionally see this sort of thing. What I'm doing here is I'm creating a list full of values using a for loop all on one line of code. I'm actually really embarrassed that I did this, and I shouldn't be showing you this sort of thing. This is a mess, and there's no good reason other than laziness to write it like this. It's hard to read. But anyway, it's created in self.x's. The good news for you is self.levels, this list, is telling this code what to put in the attribute list. It's using level list. It's using level list the entire time. So if you go to constants, this level list right here, so when you level up your critter, this is how things advance, right? Your acceleration, and by the way, these all start at 1. The reason there's a value at 0 is because the experience point bricks have the attribute value of 0. So all the critters start at 1. So your initial acceleration is 0.1, goes up to 0.15, then 0.2, and so on. Hit points start at 20, they go to 30, 40, 50, 60, etc. Some stuff doesn't level up. It's just purely used for Powerups and for special critter variants. Those are listed down here. But if you want to add a new thing, a new attribute to a critter, you basically just go down here and you say, I want to add my new critter's value. The food or the experience will just have a value of 0, maybe, whatever. And then, you know, my critter has whatever level up values, and then you name it, whatever you name it. And then you also say, okay, it has an index, and that index is the, I'm just using this same goofy word, kerfluffle. I can't spell kerfluffle either. And then you set it to the next value in the list. So if you want to add attributes, that's a little bit more sophisticated way of modifying the Diep sprite, possibly modifying the power-ups that you can create. And I would give more points for that if you did something interesting with those.